They say black boys become men at 18. I became one at 19 when I watched my Uncle Jerome molest my 12-year-old cousin Marcus in the basement of the community center that bears his name. My name is Terrell Washington, and this is the story of how I destroyed the reputation of the most beloved man in our neighborhood, and why I would do it again tomorrow if I had to. For as long as I could remember, Uncle Jerome Washington had been the unofficial mayor of our block. He was not actually my blood uncle. In black communities, we call any older man who looks out for us uncle. But Jerome had earned that title through 20 years of dedication to the kids in our neighborhood. While other men talked about what was wrong with young people today, Uncle Jerome actually did something about it. The Jerome Washington Youth Center sat on the corner of Martin Luther King Boulevard and 15th Street, in the heart of what most people called the hood. It was a converted warehouse that Uncle Jerome had bought with his own money back in 2005, when I was just 7 years old. He had transformed it into a safe haven for kids who had nowhere else to go after school and during the summer months. The center had everything: a full basketball court, computer lab with 20 stations, homework help area, art studio, music room with instruments, and a kitchen where Uncle Jerome taught kids how to cook healthy meals. Most importantly, it was staffed entirely by volunteers from the community, teachers, retired police officers, college students, and other adults who wanted to give back. Uncle Jerome himself was 52 years old, had never married, and seemed to pour all his parental instincts into caring for the neighborhood children. He was a big man, about 6'3" and 250 pounds, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a smile that made every kid feel special. He worked his day job as a supervisor at the post office, then spent every evening and weekend at the center, mentoring kids and organizing activities. "Terrell," he would say to me when I was struggling with algebra in 8th grade, "you are smart enough to figure this out. You just have to keep trying until it clicks." And he would sit with me for hours, patiently explaining concepts until I understood them. When I made the honor roll that semester, Uncle Jerome was more proud than my own parents. By the time I graduated high school and started community college, Uncle Jerome had become something of a local legend. The youth center served over 200 kids every week. Graduation rates in our neighborhood had improved dramatically since the center opened. Gang membership among local teenagers had dropped by 60%. 3 kids who had spent time at the center were now playing Division I college basketball on full scholarships. City council members came by to take pictures and make speeches about community involvement. The local newspaper did a feature story calling Uncle Jerome the man who saved a neighborhood. Pastor Williams at Mount Olive Baptist Church frequently held him up as an example of Christian service in action. "That man is doing the Lord's work," Mama would say whenever Uncle Jerome's name came up. "Taking care of all those children when he could be home watching television like everybody else." I was proud to be associated with Uncle Jerome. When I told people where I was from, they would often say, "Oh, that is the neighborhood with that amazing youth center." Instead of being ashamed of coming from a rough area, I could talk about the positive changes that were happening thanks to Uncle Jerome's leadership. So when my 12-year-old cousin Marcus started acting strangely in the spring of my first year of college, Uncle Jerome was the last person I suspected of being the cause. Marcus was my Aunt Denise's youngest son, a bright kid who loved basketball and wanted to be a veterinarian when he grew up. He had been spending time at the youth center since he was 8 years old, and Uncle Jerome had taken a special interest in mentoring him. Marcus was one of Uncle Jerome's special helpers, a group of about 10 kids who got to stay late to help clean up and assist with preparing for the next day's activities. But sometime around March, Marcus started changing. He became withdrawn and moody. His grades dropped from A's and B's to C's and D's. He stopped wanting to go to the youth center, which was unusual because he used to beg Aunt Denise to let him go there every day after school. "I do not feel like it today," he would say when Aunt Denise asked if he wanted to go to the center. "Marcus, baby, you love going to see Uncle Jerome and playing basketball with your friends. I just want to stay home." When Aunt Denise mentioned Marcus's behavior changes to the family, Uncle Jerome offered to talk to him. Sometimes boys that age go through phases, Uncle Jerome said during our monthly family dinner. Let me spend some one-on-one time with Marcus. I bet I can figure out what is bothering him. Would you, Jerome? I am worried about him. Of course. Marcus is like my own son. I will take care of him. Looking back now, I realize that offer should have been a red flag. But at the time, it seemed like typical Uncle Jerome kindness, always willing to go the extra mile to help a kid in need. A few weeks later, I was at the youth center helping Uncle Jerome with inventory in the storage room when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Two of the older kids, probably about 15 or 16, were talking in the hallway outside the storage room. They did not know I was in there with the door cracked open. Man, I feel bad for Marcus, one of them said. Yeah, that little dude has been acting weird lately. You think Uncle Jerome is, doing stuff to him? I do not know, but remember what happened to Kevin last year. He started acting the same way, and then he just stopped coming to the center. And what about Damon? Same thing happened to him. We should say something. Say something to who? Nobody is going to believe us. Uncle Jerome is like a saint around here. Yeah, you are probably right. I stood frozen in that storage room, listening to these two teenagers basically confirm my worst fears. The strange behavior I had been noticing in Marcus, the pattern with other kids who had suddenly stopped coming to the center, it all started making horrible sense. But these were just rumors from kids, right? There had to be another explanation. Uncle Jerome was the most respected man in our community. He had dedicated his life to helping children. He would never hurt a kid. Except that as I thought back over the years, I started remembering things that had seemed innocent at the time, but took on a different meaning now. The way Uncle Jerome always insisted on driving certain kids home personally instead of letting them walk with friends. The special camping trips he organized for his favorite helpers. The way he would put his hands on kids' shoulders and let them linger just a little too long. I also remembered that several promising kids had mysteriously stopped coming to the center over the years, and their families had moved away from the neighborhood shortly afterward. At the time, I had assumed they moved for better opportunities. Now I wondered if they had been running from something. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus and the changes in his behavior. I kept thinking about those two kids in the hallway and their matter-of-fact discussion of Uncle Jerome doing stuff to children. Most of all, I kept thinking about how impossible it would be to convince anyone that the neighborhood hero was actually a monster. The next day, I decided to pay closer attention during my volunteer shifts at the center. I started watching Uncle Jerome's interactions with kids, looking for signs that something inappropriate was happening. What I saw made me sick to my stomach. Uncle Jerome definitely had favorites. Always boys between the ages of 10 and 14, usually from single-mother households where there was less supervision and oversight. He would find reasons to be alone with these boys, whether it was special training sessions in the basement, leadership meetings in his office, or mentoring talks during which other kids were excluded. I also noticed that Uncle Jerome had installed several security cameras throughout the center, but there were no cameras in the basement area where he held his special training sessions. When I asked him about it, he said the basement was used for storage, and there was nothing valuable down there worth monitoring. Besides Terrell, he said with that familiar warm smile, we want the kids to feel comfortable and not like they are being watched all the time. 2 weeks later, I witnessed something that removed any doubt about what was happening at the Jerome Washington Youth Center. I had stayed late to help Uncle Jerome prepare for a weekend tournament, and most of the other volunteers had already left. Marcus was there as one of the special helpers, along with 2 other boys. Around 8 p.m., Uncle Jerome sent the 2 other boys home, but asked Marcus to stay and help him with something in the basement. Terrell, you can head out too, Uncle Jerome told me. Marcus and I can finish up down there. Actually, I do not mind staying to help, I said, testing his reaction. That is okay, nephew. You have done enough for one day. Marcus and I can handle it. Something in his tone made it clear that I was not welcome in the basement that evening. But instead of leaving, I decided to wait in the parking lot to see how long Marcus would be helping Uncle Jerome. An hour passed, then 2 hours. At 10:30 p.m., I saw Uncle Jerome's car pull out of the parking lot with Marcus in the passenger seat. I followed them at a distance and watched Uncle Jerome drop Marcus off at home. Marcus got out of the car walking stiffly, like he was in pain. The next morning, I called in sick to my classes and spent the day at the library, researching signs of child sexual abuse and how to report suspected abuse to authorities. What I learned confirmed my worst fears about Marcus's behavioral changes and the pattern I had observed with other kids. I also learned that reporting suspected abuse without concrete evidence could be challenging, especially when the accused person was a respected community figure. The word of teenagers and a 19-year-old college student against the neighborhood saint would not necessarily be enough to trigger a serious investigation. But I also learned that if I could get Uncle Jerome to admit what he was doing on tape, that would be evidence that authorities could not ignore. That afternoon, I drove to Marcus's house and asked Aunt Denise if I could take him out for ice cream and to talk about college preparation. When we were alone in my car, I carefully brought up the subject of the youth center. "Marcus, how are things going at the center these days?" "Okay, I guess. You do not seem as excited about going there as you used to be." Marcus got very quiet and stared out the window. "Terrell, can I ask you something?" "Of course, little cousin. You can ask me anything. If an adult does something to you that makes you feel bad, but everyone thinks that adult is really good, what are you supposed to do?" My heart started pounding, but I tried to keep my voice calm. "What kind of thing that makes you feel bad?" "Like touching you in places that feel wrong. And saying that if you tell anyone, nobody will believe you because you are just a kid and they are an adult that everyone respects." I had to pull over to the side of the road because my hands were shaking so badly. "Marcus, is someone touching you inappropriately?" He started crying then, deep sobs that seemed to come from somewhere broken inside him. Uncle Jerome said if I ever told anyone, he would make sure my mama lost her job at the hospital. He said people would think I was lying because everyone knows he is a good man who helps kids. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully. None of this is your fault. Uncle Jerome is the adult, and he is supposed to protect you, not hurt you. But what if people do not believe me? I believe you, and I am going to make sure he never hurts you or any other kid ever again." "How?" "Leave that to me. But Marcus, I need you to be brave for a little while longer. Can you do that?" "I think so." That evening, I called the FBI field office and spoke with a special agent named Sarah Chun, who specialized in crimes against children. I explained the situation and told her about my conversation with Marcus. "Mr. Washington, what you are describing sounds like a pattern of predatory behavior," Agent Chun said. "However, prosecuting cases like this can be challenging, especially when the accused person has a sterling reputation in the community. What would you need to build a strong case? Direct evidence, recorded admissions, physical evidence, testimony from multiple victims. The more evidence we have, the stronger the case. What if I could get him to admit what he is doing on tape? That would be very valuable evidence. However, I have to warn you that what you are suggesting could be dangerous. If Mr. Washington realizes what you are doing, he might become desperate and take actions to protect himself." "Agent Chun, this man has been molesting children for years, and nobody has stopped him because he has everyone fooled. If I do not do something, he is going to keep hurting kids." "I understand your motivation, Mr. Washington. If you decide to move forward with this, we can provide you with a recording device and safety protocols. But you need to understand the risks involved." 2 days later, I met with Agent Chun at a coffee shop downtown, where she gave me a small digital recording device that looked like a regular pen. She also gave me detailed instructions on how to use it safely and what to do if the situation became dangerous. "Your goal is to get him to admit what he has been doing to Marcus and other children," Agent Chun explained. "Try to get him to be specific about actions and timeframes if possible." But if at any point you feel unsafe, end the conversation and leave immediately. How do I bring up the subject without making him suspicious? Tell him you are concerned about Marcus's behavioral changes and ask if he has any insights. See if you can guide the conversation toward the truth without being too obvious about it. That Saturday afternoon, I volunteered for a shift at the youth center and waited until most of the other volunteers had left. Uncle Jerome was in his office doing paperwork, and I knocked on his door. "Hey, Uncle Jerome, do you have a minute to talk?" "Of course, Terrell. Come on in and have a seat." I sat down across from his desk, the recording pen hidden in my shirt pocket. My heart was beating so fast I was sure he could hear it. "I wanted to talk to you about Marcus," I began. "Aunt Denise is worried about him. He has been acting strange lately, and his grades are slipping." Uncle Jerome leaned back in his chair and smiled that familiar warm smile. "You know, I have noticed some changes in Marcus, too. He is at that age where boys start going through transitions." "What kind of transitions?" "Well, his body is changing, his hormones are affecting his mood, and he is becoming more aware of certain feelings." "Feelings?" Uncle Jerome stood up from his desk and closed the office door. "Terrell, you are old enough to understand that young boys go through phases where they are curious about their sexuality. Sometimes they need guidance from older men who can help them understand what they are experiencing." I felt sick to my stomach, but I forced myself to keep the conversation going. "Are you saying Marcus is going through something like that?" "Marcus is a very special boy. He has been coming to me with questions about his body and his feelings. I have been helping him understand that what he is experiencing is natural." "What kind of questions?" Uncle Jerome sat down on the edge of his desk, much closer to where I was sitting. "Terrell, I can see that you care about Marcus. Maybe you would like to help me mentor him through this difficult time." The way he said it, with that predatory look in his eyes, made me realize that Uncle Jerome was not just admitting to molesting Marcus. He was trying to recruit me as another victim or possibly an accomplice. "Uncle Jerome," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what exactly have you been doing to help Marcus with these feelings?" "I have been teaching him that physical affection between men is natural and healthy. I have been showing him how his body works and helping him understand that the feelings he has when I touch him are normal." "When you touch him?" "Terrell, you are a grown man now. You understand that sometimes boys need physical guidance to help them through their sexual development." I wanted to jump up and run out of that office, but I knew I needed more specific admissions for the recording to be useful. "How long have you been providing this kind of guidance to Marcus?" "Since he turned 12. That is usually when boys start needing this kind of mentorship." "And have you provided this guidance to other boys over the years?" Uncle Jerome smiled again, and this time it was not warm. It was predatory and calculating. "Terrell, I have been helping boys in this community for 20 years. I have guided dozens of young men through their sexual awakening." "Dozens?" "The boys who come to me are special. They are the ones who need extra attention, extra care. Their mothers are usually single and struggling, so these boys do not have proper male role models at home." I realized that Uncle Jerome was essentially confessing to 2 decades of systematic child abuse while justifying it as mentorship and guidance. "What about parents? Do they know about this guidance you provide?" "Of course not. Parents do not understand the special relationship between mentor and student. They would misinterpret the physical aspect of the guidance as something inappropriate. But it is not inappropriate. Terrell, everything I do is out of love for these boys. I am helping them become confident, healthy young men. The physical component is just one part of that development." At that point, I had heard enough. Uncle Jerome had essentially confessed to molesting Marcus and dozens of other boys over a 20-year period. He had also just attempted to recruit me into his network of abuse. "Uncle Jerome, I think I understand what you are saying," I said, standing up from my chair. "Let me think about how I might be able to help with Marcus." "Take all the time you need, Terrell. But remember, this conversation stays between us. The community is not ready to understand the important work we do here." I left that office feeling like I was going to vomit, But I also felt a sense of relief that I finally had evidence that could stop Uncle Jerome from hurting any more children. That evening, I met with Agent Chun and played the recording. Her face got darker and angrier as she listened to Uncle Jerome's admissions. "Mr. Washington, this recording is exactly what we needed. We can move forward with arrests and a full investigation immediately. What happens next? We will coordinate with local police to arrest Mr. Washington tomorrow morning. We will also need to interview Marcus and identify other potential victims. This case is going to be big, and it is going to attract a lot of media attention. Agent Chun, this is going to destroy our community. Uncle Jerome is like a hero to everyone in the neighborhood. Mr. Washington, heroes do not molest children. What this man has been doing is not heroic. It is criminal. And because you had the courage to expose him, other children will be safe." The next morning, I was sitting in my first class of the day when my phone started buzzing with text messages and calls. By lunchtime, the news was all over social media. Uncle Jerome Washington had been arrested on charges of child sexual abuse. The community's reaction was swift and brutal toward me. By the time I got home that afternoon, there were messages on our voicemail calling me a liar, a traitor, and worse. People I had known my whole life were posting on Facebook about how I was trying to destroy a good man for attention or money. "That boy is jealous because Uncle Jerome accomplished more by age 50 than Terrell will in his whole life," one neighbor posted. "Terrell Washington should be ashamed of himself for making up lies about a man who has done nothing but help this community," posted another. My mama was in the kitchen crying when I walked in the house. "Terrell, what have you done?" she asked. "Mama, I exposed a child molester. That man has been like family to us for 15 years. He helped you with your homework, encouraged you to go to college, gave you your first job recommendation. And he has been molesting little boys for 20 years, Mama, including Marcus. You do not know that for sure. I have him on tape admitting it." Mama sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. "Even if that is true, did you have to be the one to turn him in? Could you not have found another way?" "What other way, Mama? Let him keep hurting children because everyone thinks he is a saint." The hardest part was that even some of the victims' families initially turned against me. Parents who had trusted Uncle Jerome with their children for years could not accept that he had been abusing them. Marcus's mother, my Aunt Denise, called me that evening screaming, "Terrell, how could you involve my baby in this mess? Do you know what people are going to say about him now?" "Aunt Denise, Uncle Jerome was molesting Marcus. I did not involve Marcus in anything. I protected him from ongoing abuse. You could have talked to me first before going to the police. And what would you have done? Confronted Uncle Jerome and given him a chance to deny it and cover his tracks. I do not know, but this is not how family handles problems. This is not a family problem, Aunt Denise. This is a crime." The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I lost friends who accused me of betraying the community. I lost the respect of adults who had watched me grow up. I received threatening phone calls and messages telling me to leave the neighborhood. The youth center was closed pending the investigation, which meant that 200 kids had nowhere to go after school. Parents who depended on the center's services were now struggling to find childcare. In their minds, I was the person who had destroyed their support system. Pastor Williams called me to his office and asked me to reconsider my accusations against Uncle Jerome. "Son, I have known Jerome Washington for 20 years. He is a good Christian man who has dedicated his life to serving children. Are you certain that you are not misunderstanding something you saw or heard? Pastor Williams, I have a recording of him admitting that he has been molesting children for 2 decades. Sometimes conversations can be taken out of context, especially when people are upset or confused. He told me he has been providing physical guidance to dozens of boys over the years and tried to recruit me to help him with Marcus. There is no context that makes that appropriate." Pastor Williams leaned forward in his chair. "Terrell, even if Jerome made some mistakes, think about all the good he has done for this community. Think about all the children he has helped stay off the streets. Is it worth destroying all of that good work over?" Misunderstandings. Pastor Williams, with all due respect, molesting children is not a mistake or a misunderstanding. It is a serious crime that destroys lives. But what about forgiveness, son? What about redemption? Forgiveness and redemption do not mean allowing someone to continue hurting children. I left that meeting realizing that even some religious leaders were more concerned about protecting Uncle Jerome's reputation than protecting children from abuse. But gradually, as more evidence emerged from the FBI investigation, public opinion began to shift. Other victims started coming forward, encouraged by Marcus's courage in testifying to investigators. Parents began to recognize behavioral changes in their own children that they had previously attributed to normal growing pains. The investigation revealed that Uncle Jerome had been systematically abusing children for over 20 years. He had developed sophisticated grooming techniques, targeting vulnerable boys from single-mother households and using his position of trust in the community to avoid suspicion. Investigators also discovered that Uncle Jerome had been documenting his abuse through photographs and videos, which he stored in a hidden safe in his office at the youth center. This physical evidence corroborated the testimonies of victims and made the case against him airtight. By the time Uncle Jerome's trial began 6 months later, public opinion in the community had largely turned against him. The evidence was overwhelming, and even his most loyal supporters could no longer deny what he had been doing. During the trial, 12 different victims testified about their experiences with Uncle Jerome. Their stories were remarkably similar. He would identify vulnerable boys, slowly build their trust, introduce physical contact gradually, and use his reputation in the community to ensure their silence. He told me that nobody would believe me if I said anything bad about him. One 14-year-old victim testified. He said everyone knew he was a good man who helped kids, and they would think I was lying. Marcus also testified, and his courage in facing Uncle Jerome in court was inspiring. When the defense attorney tried to suggest that Marcus was confused about what had happened, Marcus looked directly at Uncle Jerome and said, "I know the difference between helping and hurting. What he did to me was hurting." Uncle Jerome was convicted on 47 counts of child sexual abuse and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called his crimes a systematic betrayal of the trust placed in him by an entire community. After the trial, many of the people who had initially criticized me for exposing Uncle Jerome came forward to apologize. "Terrell," Mrs. Johnson from down the street said to me one evening, "I owe you an apology. I was so angry when you first came forward because I could not believe that Jerome was capable of such things. But now I realize that you saved my grandson from being hurt." "You do not need to apologize, Mrs. Johnson. I understand why it was hard to believe at first. But I should have listened to you instead of attacking you. You were the only person brave enough to speak up for those children." My relationship with Aunt Denise also gradually healed. About a year after the trial, she called me to thank me for protecting Marcus. "Terrell, I know I was angry with you at first," she said. "I was in shock and could not accept that someone I trusted had been hurting my baby. But Marcus is doing so much better now that he is getting counseling, and that man can never hurt him again." "How is Marcus doing?" "He is back to his old self, making good grades, playing basketball, talking about becoming a veterinarian again. His therapist says he is healing well because the abuse was stopped before it went on too long. I am glad he is doing better. Terrell, I also want you to know that Marcus asks about you all the time. He says you are his hero for saving him. He is the hero for being brave enough to tell the truth." The community eventually recovered from the scandal, though it took several years. A new youth center was established with much stronger oversight and safety protocols. Multiple adults were required to be present during all activities. Background checks became mandatory for all volunteers, and children were educated about appropriate and inappropriate behavior from adults. What happened with Jerome Washington taught us that we cannot just assume someone is safe because they do good work in the community, the new center director explained during the grand opening. "We have to have systems in place to protect children, even from people we trust. I continued my education and eventually became a social worker specializing in child protection. My experience with Uncle Jerome taught me that predators often hide behind reputations for helping children, and that communities must be willing to prioritize child safety over adult reputations. Marcus graduated high school with honors and received a full scholarship to study veterinary medicine at the State University. During his graduation party, he pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Terrell, I never got to thank you properly for what you did when I was 12. Marcus, you do not need to thank me. I just did what anyone should do when they know a child is being hurt." But that is not true. A lot of people knew something was wrong, but you were the only one who cared more about protecting me than about protecting Uncle Jerome's reputation. I am just glad you are safe and doing so well. Terrell, I want you to know that what you did changed my whole life. If you had not stopped Uncle Jerome when you did, I probably would not have been able to recover the way I did. I might not have been able to go to college or have a normal relationship or trust adults again. Looking at Marcus, confident, successful, and whole, I realized that all the community backlash I had endured was worth it to see him thriving. Marcus, you know what the hardest part of that whole experience was for me? What? Realizing that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who pressure you to stay silent about abuse. Family members, church leaders, community elders, they all wanted me to protect Uncle Jerome's reputation instead of protecting you and the other kids he was hurting. But you did not let them change your mind. No, because I realized that being a man means protecting children, not protecting the adults who hurt them. As I finish my graduate degree in social work, I often think about that conversation in Uncle Jerome's office and the decision I made to expose him despite the personal cost. I think about how many children might have been saved if someone had spoken up sooner, and how many predators continue operating because communities are more concerned with preserving reputations than protecting children. The most important lesson I learned is that heroes and predators can sometimes be the same person. And when that happens, we have to choose which side of their legacy we want to protect. I chose to protect the children, even though it meant destroying the hero. Uncle Jerome Washington is now 60 years old, serving a life sentence in federal prison. The youth center that once bore his name has been renamed the Marcus Williams Center for Youth Development, honoring one of his victims instead of celebrating his perpetrator. And every time I drive past that corner of Martin Luther King Boulevard and 15th Street, I am reminded that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to stay silent, when staying silent would allow evil to continue hiding behind a mask of goodness. The community eventually learned to separate Uncle Jerome's legitimate good work from his criminal behavior. They learned that it is possible to appreciate the positive impact he had on some children's lives while still holding him accountable for the harm he caused to others. Most importantly, they learned that protecting children must always take priority over protecting adult reputations, no matter how beloved or respected those adults might be. Today, Marcus is thriving in veterinary school, and the 11 other victims who testified at Uncle Jerome's trial are all receiving counseling and support to help them heal from their trauma. None of them will ever fully recover from what Uncle Jerome did to them, but they are all safe from future harm because someone was finally willing to speak the truth. And sometimes that is all you can do. Speak the truth and let the consequences fall where they may. Because the alternative, staying silent while children suffer, is not really an alternative at all. There are more stories like mine, guys who refused to stay silent, who broke the cycle instead of repeating it. 2 of them are right here on your screen. Click the one that speaks to your own fight. And if you want to walk with a community that knows sometimes saving your family means stopping them, tap the bell. I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.